Hello and welcome to Heartbeat. This week I speak to David Campanale about the threats he's suffered to his freedom of conscience and freedom of expression.
The local party chair referred to a 2-hour hearing where I was summoned to the home of Lord Tope, the party local president, in front of 30 activists, all lined up literally in rows in his front room. I was interrogated, and it was an interrogation. Just before Christmas, the party's defence at the court completely collapsed. The Liberal Democrats admitted to religious discrimination on grounds of my beliefs. They've also admitted a breach of contract, and they have agreed to pay damages.
William brings us a roundup of news from home and abroad, and Delphine gives us her viewpoint on loneliness and the threats to family life. All right, David, thanks for joining me. So the Liberal Democrats admitted to several counts of unlawful discrimination against you when you were deselected as a prospective parliamentary candidate for the party more than 2 years ago. Can you give us a quick roundup of that process, how it started and how it ended?
So the good news is that just before Christmas, the party's defence at the court completely collapsed. And having stood behind a defence that said they were entitled to remove candidates on grounds of their religious beliefs, the Liberal Democrats admitted to religious discrimination on grounds of my beliefs. They've also admitted a breach of contract, and they have agreed to pay damages. So what sadly happened was that I was selected before the 2024 general election to stand in a Lib Dem target seat in London, close to where I live. It's in the borough where I was born, in Sutton. And sadly, the losing side, the supporters of the losing other candidates, among them were those who were opposed to my Christian convictions. And immediately they said that now that we know that a Christian with your orthodox personal views on matters of conscience has been chosen by the members, we will refuse to deliver your leaflets, we will refuse to invite you to campaign meetings, and we will campaign to remove you. Not because of anything that I had publicly said, not for anything that I had campaigned for that was opposed to party policy, but purely because of how I might vote on issues of conscience, especially the rights of the unborn child and older and disabled people who face the threat of being killed through assisted suicide.
So would you say that the party that once embraced Christians like Charles Kennedy, Dame Shirley Williams, is dead, is gone, it's a relic of the past?
It's not dead yet, but the party did say that the Christian influence on the Liberal Democrats of Charles Kennedy and Shirley Williams, former distinguished figures in the party, both faithful Roman Catholics and pro-life, they said that party, that influence, the Christian influence on the party, is now over, and that is a fact. So what the activists told me in Sutton was that I had no rights of conscience, even though the party constitution guarantees it. They said these rights cannot include the sorts of views that Christians hold. And the tragedy of what has transpired is that court, in the legal process, documents have emerged from within the party. These are hidden, secret policies that are designed to exclude Christians of orthodox views. So Robert Flello is the former Labour Member of Parliament for Stoke. He decided to stand as a Liberal Democrat in the 2019 general election. He's a former chair of the Catholic Society, former chair of the Catholic Legislators Network in Parliament, and himself a distinguished parliamentarian. But the moment he was chosen, shortly after, he was, before nomination papers could go in, he was summarily removed, deselected. And using these legal processes, his legal team obtained internal documents that are quite chilling. And one of them, and I've seen his legal team has shared these with me, and one of them says, you can be a member of the Liberal Democrats and be pro-life, but you cannot be a parliamentary candidate. Now, the way in which I was removed, and I believe in the way in which he was removed, is illegal. I was chosen democratically, overwhelmingly actually, by members in Sutton and Cheam. They saw the campaign I'd run in the 2019 general election for the Liberal Democrats. They knew I'd had 8 years as a Lib Dem councillor. I'd worked for the party in Parliament. I'd worked for the party in HQ. I'd helped run a Lib Dem think tank. I was vice chair of the Party Leaders Constituency Association, which sits next door to Sutton and Cheam, Kingston upon Thames. They knew my background as a campaigner for social justice causes, for climate issues, for workplace rights, for equal rights for women, against the persecution of religious belief around the world. I happen to be a former director of one of Britain's biggest disaster relief charities. I was also chair of the National Union of Journalists in BBC News. I'd won global awards for my investigative journalism. And the Liberal Democrats in Sutton said that it's your Christian beliefs that we have a concern about. And it was for these that I was removed.
And it does seem to be particularly Christian beliefs as opposed to religious beliefs, because I can't help thinking about a parallel case that in some ways overlapped with yours a couple of years ago, which was when, we're talking about the Liberal Democrats, but this mindset affects other parties. When Kate Forbes stood for the leadership of the Scottish National Party. Kate Forbes is a Christian and a very open, honest about her Christian beliefs and her Christian convictions. She was put under the most intense scrutiny and criticism. She stood, ironically, against another SNP MSP, Hamza Yousaf, who was a Muslim and who wasn't put under nearly as much of any questioning or criticism about his beliefs. And it brought out into the open this deep anti-Christian, quite pervasively anti-Christian attitude within our political parties.
Yes, we have to sigh. You know, it says in the scriptures, Jesus warned his followers, in this world you shall have tribulation. So the experience, and Kate and I have spoken about this together, and Robert Flello and I have spoken about each of our experiences. It's a sad reality of the state of politics. But be of good cheer, Jesus says to his followers. We have overcome the world. For those in Christ Jesus, we are already, we see the world differently. I mean, the key thing for me, if I might talk about faith, is that if you are dead to the world and all that it offers you, it's straightforward to follow Christ into the most difficult place. Now, the two previous parliamentary candidates in Sutton and Cheam happened to be two Muslim women. But neither were put through multiple party interrogations, but I was. They weren't questioned about their Islamic convictions, but I was interrogated, and it was an interrogation. The local party chair referred to a 2-hour hearing where I was summoned to the home of Lord Tope, the party local president, in front of 30 activists, all lined up literally in rows in his front room, where they read out, people came with prepared denunciations. It was what in Chairman Mao's China during the Cultural Revolution are known as struggle sessions, where people denounce you, and they wanted me to denounce my Catholic views. They lined up 3 Roman Catholic members, 2 were senior members of the party, 1 locally, and they said, well, we personally as Roman Catholics think that abortion is wrong, but we would not dare to suggest that in Parliament that view should become law, that view should shape how you might vote as our MP. And so there was extraordinary hostility from people who I had counted as those who would understand that conscience is not something you can trade. It was almost as if I was stood looking at they made it clear, it was not on almost. You can be our MP, you can have everything that you have devoted yourself in public life through decades of service in different ways. You know, if you but agree to denounce the unborn child, you can have everything that you have prepared your life for in your vocation. It's a pretty tricky choice. You're offered that. You know, you weigh up these things. Just imagine the kind of pro-life causes and justice issues, the poverty campaigns. You know, last year, Shelter estimated the housing charity that there are 100,000 children in London living in temporary accommodation. There are 500,000 people in 2025 who spent over 12 hours on a trolley in accident and emergency in hospitals up and down Britain. These are the sorts of issues and causes that I would have campaigned on. A total pro-life ethic, not just ones about the law in relation to the dignity and personhood of the unborn and older people, but a pro-life ethic for the whole of politics.
But given what has happened and the fact that those views were so criticised and were so scrutinised, do you think we've got to the stage where people who would hold similar convictions to yours would not be in favour of abortion, would have traditional Christian views, will no longer have a place inside parties, mainstream parties? They should potentially look to stand as independents or with smaller fringe parties? Or do you think it's important that Christians still make every effort to bring their views and their beliefs and their perspectives into our mainstream major parties?
I honestly can't answer that. I just don't know. All I do know that is a few weeks ago, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, gave an interview in London in which he spoke about the demonic. He said that he sees the demonic active in public life in terms of the lack of truthfulness, and that this is how this has impacted the public square. He referred to it in these dark spiritual terms. And I have to say that I think that I understand why he would argue that. What we are witnessing is the hardening of the hearts of our political institutions against Christianity. It says in the scriptures, I see here before you stand life and death. Choose life. We have that call to choose life. And yet we have a political system that in so many ways is choosing death over and over again, whether it's abortion up to birth or assisted suicide, although thankfully that seems to have been put on pause, at least for a short period of time. In terms of in so many ways, in undermining the natural family and God's purpose for children to be raised in a loving and committed home led by married parents. All this questioning of all that is good that we've experienced in our Christian culture for over a millennia, at least in Britain. So these are difficult times, but I think we should act with wisdom. It may well be that if we lay down, if we don't surrender, the most important thing for me was not to surrender. And I said at my deselection meeting in November the 1st, 2022, in front of a hall of people that were shouting. I was represented by the former Minister of Justice, Simon Hughes, himself an Anglican Christian, who said to the members gathered there, you cannot remove somebody on grounds of their Christian convictions. They started shouting at him. The waves of hostility coming through that room were extraordinary. There was a witness statement I will never forget, written by a non-church-going retired businessman who was sat in the middle. And in his witness statement of that extraordinary meeting, he described himself feeling scared. Such was this febrile atmosphere, the description that was used as again by the former chair of the Sutton Liberal Democrats. So I went through what she called kangaroo courts, mob rule, baying mobs of people that were not targeting, not questioning me about my political experience, but they just wanted to talk. I mean, I wanted to talk about the good policies that I wanted to campaign on, but they wanted to talk about how I might vote in Parliament on the unborn child. Now, I have no difficulty answering questions, and I think it's entirely right that party members should ask questions of their candidates about how they might vote in Parliament on anything. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not ashamed of being a follower of Christ. I'm glad that it shapes my outlook in life, and Christ has sustained me through this very dark period. But what cannot happen is that once the members have chosen a candidate, that your Christian convictions on non-whipped issues in Parliament are the grounds of a removal. So what the party did was illegal. It was they basically ripped up the party's own procedures. It says You can remove a candidate. I mean, obviously, if they're failing to perform, if they're lazy, if they've just not done what was required. That's to be understood. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a removal because of the fact that I will follow my conscience on these issues in Parliament.
Yeah, you refused to check your conscience at the door, and you were determined to hold on to it, and that was obviously very, very threatening. So, first of all, congratulations on your victory, but also on having the principles and the temerity to carry it through, because many people wouldn't have done that. The whole, I think, thrust or purpose of these sort of chilling scenarios is to intimidate people and to turn them against standing, and hopefully people will look, but particularly other political parties will look at your case, and it will cause them to pause and think very carefully.
Sadly, not yet. I mean, the illegality was admitted to the court in December. Did I get a phone call from the party leadership apologising? No. Has any member of the parliamentary party, I mean, we keep being told by the Liberal Democrats that they have lots of folk who go to church. Well, viewers can just do a quick Google search and ask themselves the question, how many members of the parliamentary Liberal Democrats have spoken up to condemn the hate, the discrimination, and the victimisation? Let me answer that for you. You will find that not one member of the parliamentary party of the Liberal Democrats has condemned what has happened here. And that's because the hate like this that drives out people of conviction and principle creates an atmosphere of fear. And what's happened here to Kate Forbes, what's happened to Tim Farron, what happened to Robert Flello, what's happened in previous decades to David Alton, who I used to work for, and what's happened to myself. It creates a chilling atmosphere for Christians in public life. Now, I want to encourage everyone. You don't have to go through and experience bullying and harassment. There is such a thing called the National Bullying Helpline. Ring them. Tell a friend, tell a member you might know from church or in your faith community. Tell a family or a colleague. Keep a contemporaneous notes if you're experiencing abuse. And get advice. You can visit my website, www.davidcampanale.co.uk, where you can be in touch with me. You can get some thoughts there, at least, on the kinds of steps that you need to take to protect yourself. But in all things, be prepared to surrender and lay down your life, politically, I mean, at least. Thankfully, in Britain, Christians are not attacked and beaten up on the streets or murdered in the ways that Jews are. And I'm mindful that yesterday was the anniversary of the execution of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So we know that in totalitarian systems, if you hold on to faith and conscience, you may have to pay the ultimate price. We're not there yet. So I'd encourage people to participate insofar as their conscience allows in our political system. Pray that God would open up a door for you to strengthen you as you enter into that space. And get into the business of equipping yourself for public service. That's what we're called to do as Christians, to serve and love our neighbours. It's not about us, it's about them. It's about what we can do to see God's kingdom of justice, peace, and joy brought into the world through small acts of mercy and service. And I don't know what the future holds for me next, but I'm pondering that. And we need to rally and support each other in the pro-life movement to keep pressing on. This is a cause that we will not give up. The rights of the unborn are paramount rights. And we cannot just discard the fact that 9 million unborn persons have had their lives terminated through the tragedy and the appalling act and the violent act of abortion. And we will not forget them, and we must press on.
Well, David, again, congratulations on your victory. We will share the link to your website, and thanks today for your time and for your insights.
Thank you for the encouragement of all at SPUC. God bless each and every one of you.
Thanks. God bless you too. Thanks very much, David.
A decision by a popular YouTuber and his wife to abort their unborn child who was diagnosed with Down syndrome has reignited debate about the value of every human life, regardless of disability. Jessie Ridgway, known online as McJuggernuggets, revealed that prenatal testing showed their baby had a high likelihood of having Down syndrome, leading the couple to choose abortion after what they described as a painful and emotional process. The announcement sparked widespread discussion across social media, with many families raising children with Down syndrome sharing their stories of joy, achievement, and unconditional love. Disability advocates argue that decisions based on prenatal diagnoses risk sending a message that lives affected by disabilities are less valuable or less worthy of protection. Supporters of the couple emphasise the personal nature of the decision, while critics express concern about the growing number of abortions following a Down syndrome diagnosis. The controversy has highlighted broader ethical questions surrounding prenatal screening, disability rights, and society's commitment or lack of commitment to welcoming children with special needs. Pope Leo XIV used his first visit to Spain to deliver a strong appeal for Europe to defend human dignity at every stage of life, while also addressing migration, peace, and growing social divisions across the continent. During a historic address to the Spanish Parliament, the pontiff warned that Europe faces a deep spiritual and cultural crisis marked by polarization, violence, and declining respect for fundamental human values. Among the issues highlighted by the Pope was the protection of unborn children. He reiterated the Catholic Church's long-standing opposition to abortion and euthanasia, arguing that a society's moral strength is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable members. The Pope's remarks came as several European nations continued to debate laws affecting the beginning and end of life. Pope Leo also called on governments to pursue peace through dialogue rather than increased militarization, while urging nations to address the causes of migration and provide humane treatment for those seeking refuge. During visits to Madrid and the Canary Islands, he emphasized that every person possesses inherent dignity and deserves protection and respect. The visit, which drew massive crowds across Spain, reinforced the Pope's message that Europe's future depends on solidarity, compassion, and a renewed commitment to defending the weakest members of society. The final moments of an elderly Canadian man have reignited concerns about the safety and ethics of euthanasia after reports emerged that he repeatedly cried out, "Help me," during a procedure that did not go as planned. According to a case review, the 87-year-old Ontario man, identified only as Mr. D, experienced significant distress after a sedative failed to have its intended effect before his life was ended under Canada's Medical Assistance in Dying, or MAID, program. The review found that Mr. D showed signs of physical and psychological suffering, including groaning, grimacing, and repeated pleas for help before deeper sedation was achieved. Family members who witnessed the procedure reportedly experienced profound distress as they watched their father suffer. The case has intensified scrutiny of Canada's euthanasia system, which has expanded significantly since being legalised in 2016. Critics argue that incidents such as this challenge claims that medically assisted death always provides a peaceful and dignified end-of-life experience. Campaigners concerned about assisted suicide say the incident highlights the need for greater investment in palliative care and stronger protections for vulnerable patients. They argue that true compassion should focus on relieving suffering without intentionally ending life, particularly when complications can leave patients and their families facing traumatic final moments. New figures showing Scotland recorded 18,783 abortions in 2025, the highest number ever reported, have prompted renewed calls for greater support for women facing crisis pregnancies and stronger protections for unborn children. According to Public Health Scotland, the total represents a 55% increase since 2016, with abortion rates reaching 17.6 per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44. The statistics also revealed that more than 42% of abortions were repeat procedures, while 277 involved babies diagnosed with disabilities, a significant increase compared with previous years. There were also 209 abortions carried out after 18 weeks of pregnancy. Christian and family organisations describe the figures as a tragedy for both mothers and their unborn children, calling on policymakers to invest more heavily in pregnancy support services, housing assistance, and family-friendly policies. SPUC believes the figures should serve as a wake-up call, encouraging Scotland to build a culture where every child is welcomed and every woman receives the support she needs to choose life. The Scottish Council on Human Bioethics, founded in 1997 as an independent non-partisan charity engaged in the field of medical ethics, held its annual conference in Glasgow last week. The theme of the conference was, "What is a person?" I asked Dr. Callum McKellar, Director of Research at the Scottish Council on Human Bioethics, about the event.
The Scottish Council on Human Bioethics has existed now for more than 25 years, and its role is to try and encourage people to think things through relating to ethics. Ethics is looking at the advantages and the risks, but especially in the context of biomedicine. So we help people, the media, for example, the journalists, when they contact us or when we write articles, we give evidence to the different parliaments in Westminster and Scotland. We also try to encourage the general public to think about these issues. For instance, by organising conferences on the topic of what is the person that we've just done. So to try and encourage people in society, especially in Scotland, to think about these issues and look and balance the advantages against the real risks that sometimes exist.
The conference, particularly with the inclusion of a panel discussion, allowed for delegates to seriously ponder the concept of personhood, at a time when seemingly fewer and fewer people are able to identify what a person is. I'm William Curry, and that was SPUC TV News, bringing to light the other side.
We often talk about loneliness as if it were a private feeling, a personal struggle, something that happens quietly inside individual lives. But loneliness today is not just an emotional problem, it's a social one. In today's culture, surveys consistently show that despite being the most digitally connected generation in history, many people feel profoundly alone. 61% of British adults experiencing loneliness have never shared it with anyone. And 1 in 3 adults are now turning to AI chatbots for mental health and well-being support. And the main barrier to talking about loneliness is internalized stigma, feelings of embarrassment, shame, or fear of judgment. This all shows that something deeper has shifted in how we live together. And in the United Kingdom, that shift has become impossible to ignore. I'm Delphine, and this is my viewpoint. In 2018, the UK became the first country in the world to appoint a minister for loneliness. At the time, it sounded unusual, almost symbolic, but the decision followed growing evidence that loneliness had become widespread across British society. Research from the Campaign to End Loneliness estimates that millions of people in the UK frequently feel lonely, and that chronic loneliness can have serious consequences for physical and mental health. Studies have even suggested that prolonged loneliness can be as harmful to health as smoking or obesity. This is not just about older people living alone, though they are often the most visible. Loneliness now affects young adults, middle-aged professionals, single people, and even those surrounded by colleagues and acquaintances. In other words, loneliness has spread despite, or perhaps because of, modern life. We can message friends instantly, video call relatives across continents, and share life updates with hundreds of people at once. And yet many people report feeling less known, less supported, and less rooted than previous generations. So what changed? One of the most significant shifts has been the gradual weakening of family life and stable community structures. For most of human history, people lived within networks of obligation and belonging. Families were not simply emotional units, they were social systems that linked generations together. Grandparents, parents, children, cousins, neighbours, and extended kin formed a web of everyday life. Those systems were rarely perfect, but they provided something modern societies often struggle to replace: continuity and geographic proximity to your community. Today, that continuity has thinned. Marriage rates have fallen across much of the Western world. Family sizes have shrunk. More people live alone than ever before, and many young adults move frequently for work or education, leaving behind the communities they grew up in. In England and Wales, the number of single-person households has steadily increased over the past decades. Living alone is not necessarily a problem. Many people thrive with independence, but when independence becomes the default model of adulthood, rather than a life stage or season, something important disappears, because independence can easily drift into social isolation. And isolation over time becomes loneliness. The irony is that modern society promised us something different. We were told that loosening traditional structures would bring freedom and fulfillment, that individuals could design their lives according to personal preference without being constrained by expectations of family, community, or permanence. But freedom without connection does not satisfy the deeper human need for belonging. In fact, many people now experience a strange contradiction. They are free to structure their lives however they wish, yet struggle to build the stable relationships that make life meaningful. Part of the difficulty lies in the fragility of modern relationships. When family structures weaken, friendships are often expected to carry more emotional weight. Yet friendships, however valuable, are usually more voluntary and flexible than family bonds. People move cities, careers change, and social circles shift. The result is that relationships can feel temporary, even when they are sincere. Technology has also altered how we interact. Social media platforms promise connection, but they often encourage a form of interaction that is quick, curated, and shallow. Instead of sustained relationships, we accumulate audiences, and instead of community, we develop visibility. But visibility is not the same as being known or being vulnerable, which is one of the key ingredients to friendship and intimacy, alongside positivity and consistency, according to friendship expert Shasta Nelson. And this matters because loneliness is not simply the absence of people, it's the absence of reliable, enduring relationships. The collapse of family life intensifies this problem in subtle ways. When fewer people marry or have children, the natural structures that connect generations weaken. There are fewer gatherings, fewer shared routines, fewer reasons for extended families to remain intertwined. As a result, many people reach adulthood with fewer long-term anchors. The consequences become especially visible later in life. Older people who outlive partners or friends can find themselves with shrinking networks of support. Age UK reports that large numbers of older people experience chronic loneliness, sometimes going weeks without meaningful conversation. But the roots of that loneliness often begin decades earlier, when the structures that once sustained community gradually dissolve. One of the most important social structures to decline over the past 40 years has been the church. As religious practice has fallen, loneliness has risen almost in parallel. For centuries, congregations were natural centers of community, places of friendship, belonging, and social cohesion. People met regularly, supported one another, and shared in the rhythms of life together. But as regular church attendance has faded, much of that communal life has faded with it. None of this means we should romanticize the past. Previous generations faced different hardships and constraints, but we should ask an honest question. If modern society has made individuals freer than ever before, why are so many people more alone? Perhaps the answer is that freedom by itself is not enough. Human beings are not designed merely for independence. We are designed for belonging, responsibility, and love. And belonging requires something modern culture often hesitates to embrace: commitment. Stable relationships require sacrifice. Family life demands patience, and community involves inconvenience. But these should not be seen as merely burdens. Instead, we should acknowledge that they are the very conditions that make deep connection possible. If we want to address the loneliness epidemic, we cannot rely solely on policies, apps, or awareness campaigns. We must also rebuild the social structures that allow people to belong to one another across time. Because loneliness is not just a private sadness. It is a signal that something essential in our shared life has weakened, and that restoring connection will require us to value family, community, and commitment once again.
That's all we have time for this week. If you're enjoying our content, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions or topics you think we should cover, please email us at the address on the screen or in the description below. Thank you for watching.